lot of these organizations had given bad loans outside, and these loans were, one day will come home to roost. It was a matter of, somebody coming out there and saving those organizations and then moving on from there. And I think that's what the US economy did, where it went and it supported these organizations, and then moved on from there once things got better. I think today what's happening is that nobody knows. I think every country is kind of grappling with how to tackle this crisis, and I think we have to just wait. And as time progresses, probably every country will get clarity on how to tackle this kind of issue. On the investing side, one thing I always see when there is a market crash. So I was in the thick and thin of things during the 2008 crisis. Um, Before the crisis, nobody used to talk about risk, right? It's only when you have falls like these, a 20%, 30, 40% crack in the market, that you start appreciating what risk can be in your portfolio. Suddenly when you see your portfolio off by 35, 40%, it shocks you like hell.
Yeah.
And I think these events, though, shouldn't happen, but in a sense, it kind of gives you that much more experience and that much more understanding on how your portfolio should look like, when you go ahead. I also find that when you have a crisis like this, a lot many more people come into the fold and start investing. So you yourself might have seen that there would have been a huge jump in terms of number of investors in just a month's time. The work that you would have done in the last 1 year, you would have seen it happening now in the last month and a half.
Yeah.
Right? Because you find a lot of more people coming in and saying that, look, valuations look good at this point of time. And if I can buy stocks today at 3-year-old valuations, and if I miss the boat today, then I'm silly.
Yeah.
Right. So therefore, you find a lot of these new guys coming in, and that's extremely important for financial literacy. So I would say two things. One is that at this point of time, very difficult to say how it's going to look. I hope we get out of it soon, and we're back to the new normal. And second thing is, you find a lot of people coming in and understanding, playing around with the markets, and also understanding what it is to actually manage their portfolio in a crash like this. It leads to that much more experience.
Yeah. No, fair enough, Vishal. Thanks. So, will this see like a reset of ETF at passive? I mean, you've been a champion of ETF and passive in this country for 15 plus years now, and there's always a catalyst somewhere, somehow, which we sort of always aspire that probably, yeah, that's the event when people will start appreciating us more. So you think the new normal will be more biased towards passive / exchange traded funds per se?
See, I think passive should be a part of everyone's portfolio anyway. It doesn't matter whether there is a crisis or not a crisis. I'll just take 2 minutes to, possibly explain to you the difference between passive and active. I mean, what is an active fund manager? An active fund manager is basically a guy who says that, look, I have the ability and I have the understanding to be able to invest in stocks and outbeat the market. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's who you call as an active fund manager.
Mm-hmm.
On the flip side, you have the complete opposite theory called as passive investing. What does passive investing say? Passive investing says that, look, the market is an efficient place, full stop. If it's an efficient place, then how can one fund manager beat the other fund manager? Because at the end of the day, today, if let's take a simple example, Reliance is trading at 1500 rupees. Okay. So today it's trading at 1500 rupees, not because one guy has decided that, it's because you as a market has come together and decided, look, this should be the value of that stock today. And therefore, all value has got factored into that stock at this point of time, right?
Yeah.
And that's how the entire philosophy comes. In the whole process of we trying to beat the market and trying to generate alpha all the time, we miss out the basic thing like the beta in the market. The first thing is, look, why do I want to be in the market? I want to be in the market. First thing, look, I want to beat inflation, right? That is why I'm getting into equity. Second thing is, maybe I believe I'm very bullish about my own country here. There was a point of time, forget the COVID crisis, which everyone is going through, but we're all very bullish about our country, right?
Yeah.
We all believe that our government is a good government. We all believe that the next 10, 15 years will possibly be an India story, which has been, which will take us to a 5 trillion, 7, $10 trillion economy, right? We're all very bullish about our country. Now, if you're bullish about your country, the simple thing for you to do is sit on the best stocks that are there in the country at that point of time, right?
Yeah.
Instead of going there, looking for the fund manager, looking for a stock, looking for a sector all the time, that can be a small part of your portfolio.
Yeah.
Right. But that small part of the portfolio suddenly starts becoming very big.
Yeah.
And we somehow don't realize the amount of risk we're taking.
Yeah.
Right. Whereas if you go back, your simple strategy was, look, I want simple equity returns. Now, the way to get a simple equity return is to invest in a simple ETF or an index fund, which is low cost, right? Now, think about something like a Nifty ETF, like a Nifty Bees, okay? The expense ratio of a Nifty Bees is 0.05% per annum, right? Which means if you were holding Nifty Bees for 10 years, you are paying us 0.5% as management fee, right? For investing in the 50 best companies that are there in the country. Okay. Now look at the flip side. If you go to an active fund manager, okay, you're paying in 1.25% if you're investing in a direct plan per year, and 2.25% if you are coming through a regular plan. Right. Now let's take a simple example. You're investing in a direct plan. In 10 years time, 12.5% of your return has gone to the fund manager. In the hope that he will outperform.
Absolutely.
Right. How many of them have been consistent? Right. So therefore, I'm putting all that money in, banking on that fund manager, hoping that he'll outperform. Right. And now, to what extent is he outperform? I don't know. So first, he has to give me the 12.5% alpha first. And then over and above that, give me the alpha, which will be better than the market.
So in fact, Vishal, tell me, is there a science involved in picking up a fund manager?
I don't think there's any science. I mean, if you look at history, you will find that at different points of time, there are different fund managers and different schemes that have done well. History has shown that. I mean, I don't know, I cannot show you that heat map over here, but we have created a heat map over the last 10 years. And every year there's been a different scheme which has done well.
Right? So how do you pick that scheme, right? Every year you can't change your fund manager either, right? So how do you pick that particular scheme?
It's extremely difficult. And why does this happen? Okay, why is it happening that whether it's in India, whether it's internationally, why is it that fund managers are not able to be consistent? It's not that they're bad guys. It's not that they're not intelligent, but the market is becoming efficient. I mean, we were doing simple numbers, we were looking at the fact that, look, there are 40,000 corporates in India which are into the business of generating alpha. There are 40,000 corporates, brokers, mutual funds, financial institutions, 40,000. Now, assume that each of these institutions has 5 people in them. We're talking about 2 lakh people on a day-to-day basis trying to pick up a winner in those 150 stocks that are there. I mean, think about it. I mean, what are we doing? I mean, you're trying. I mean, the odds are always against you. You look at the amount of Demat accounts. Last I heard, there were 2 crore Demat accounts. Usme se active were about 60-70 lakh or so.
No, it's gone to 1 crore plus now after this whole blitz of new Demat account opening in March and April, where we saw new customer base coming in. So it's probably 1 crore plus active Demat accounts as of today.
So it's about 1 crore active Demat accounts. Now you think about it. These 1 crore people are guys who are trading the market, right? Everyone has a little bit of information, right? Everybody is participating in the market, right? So what is my odd of a fund manager going right here? If there are 50 fund managers, my odds of a fund manager going right is 1 divided by 50. Right? And that's what is happening if you go to see.
Sure. Fair enough. So I'll just pick up some questions as we speak, So, I mean, even in ETFs, Vishal, how do we select the best ETFs, because this is one question that we get continuously asked by our clients, that how do we understand which ETFs are going to be better,
So 2 things. One obviously very important thing is liquidity on the stock market. You should pick an ETF which is most liquid, because at the end of the day, the beauty of an ETF is liquidity on the stock market. An ETF allows you to buy, you're able to buy a Nifty ETF, okay, as long as it's liquid. Now, if it is not liquid, then the impact of you buying that can be huge, right? So the first thing is that choose the most liquid ETF that is there, and the second thing is look at tracking error. Right, any ETF which has a low tracking error is a good ETF. So I think there are 2 parameters that any investor can look at while investing in an ETF.
That's good, helpful, Vishal. How do you differentiate between ETFs and index funds?
See, I think philosophically, people should look at it philosophically. I don't think whether it's an ETF or an index fund, it matters so much. You should have a passive product in your portfolio, because passive products are cheap. Right. If you buy a ETF, if you buy a Nifty ETF, is 0.05% per annum. If you buy a Nifty index fund, okay, it is 0.1%. Okay. So you're buying the 50 best companies which are there, at a very dirt cheap price, right? So I think philosophically, you should have a passive product in your portfolio, because you don't want to sit there and bank on a fund manager who may go wrong,
Yeah.
right? Keeping in mind that you're going to invest for the next 10 years. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that a lot of people come back and say that, look, I can't buy an ETF because I don't have a broking account, I don't have a demat account, right? That's when an index fund makes more sense. But I would say that between the two, an ETF is a structurally better product, okay, because it allows you to buy and sell real time. It comes into your demat account. It's very simple. An index fund, though not as good as an ETF, but should be a part of your portfolio if you are not in a position to buy an ETF. I would say that.
Sure. So Vishal, I mean, please, on this note, can you talk a little bit about thematic ETFs, because I know that Nippon has done some work around that as well. It's probably not very well marketed, that a lot of people know about it as well. But what's the future for this space? Are you probably planning to do more innovation around, picking up the winners and, making up ETFs or index fund format around that?
See, even if you see what has happened globally, Nitin, whether it's smart beta ETFs, whether it's thematic ETFs, they've not done very well. In the Indian context too, we find very little demand coming in for smart beta ETFs at this point of time. Though we have a couple of them, but at the end of the day, the bellwether indices like the Nifty index, the Nifty Next 50, something like a gilt ETF, something like a mid cap ETF, ETFs which are diversified generally find more favor in the markets generally, and it's not only in India, it's even internationally.
Yeah.
Some people will throw numbers at you. They'll tell you that, internationally, $5 trillion is there in ETFs, nearly 600, $700 million in smart beta ETFs. But when you dive a little deeper into what those ETFs are, nearly 60% of that $600, $700 million is in dividend yield strategies. Okay, now what are those dividend yield strategies? People are investing in dividend yield strategies because of the fact that interest rates are very low in those countries, right? So nobody is doing anything great about smart beta in that sense. Also remember one thing, people mistake smart beta for a passive product. Okay, smart beta is not a passive philosophy. Smart beta is the cover of an active philosophy into a quantitative model. Right? What are you saying? You're saying, look, I don't believe in a passive strategy. So I don't believe that HDFC Bank should be 10% of the index. I don't believe that Reliance should be 10% of the index. And therefore, I try and put filters in it, okay, and come up with some kind of a strategy which beats that index. But remember one thing, the day you move away from passive, see today, if HDFC Bank, Reliance is 10% of the index, it's not that the index service provider is giving the 10%. The market is giving 10% value to that particular stock in the index. It's not the index service provider, right? The day you move away from a passive strategy, the day you move away from a pure market cap market strategy, you become active. Right? So when you become active, you're getting into an active domain where you're saying, look, I don't believe in passive, and this is a part of an active strategy, right? So all I want to, the point that I'm trying to make here is that remember one thing, smart beta is not a passive strategy, it's an active strategy covered in a quantitative model, right? Now, my belief is that such strategies should always be a smaller portion of your portfolio, right? And we always say that whenever you are developing your portfolio, you should always split it in a core and satellite model, right? Where the core becomes your market, which is your bread and butter, where you're saying, look, I believe in the India growth story, and that should be the core. So maybe 75% of your portfolio should be that core. And the rest 25% can be, any kind of strategy which you believe may outperform, which can be, you can buy an active fund manager, you can buy a sector, you can buy real estate, you can buy gold, you can buy a smart beta strategy. So that's how you need to kind of split your strategy and not get confused, in the entire thing.
No, great, Vishal. Thanks. Very helpful. Now, next question which we are getting is, what are the diversification options available? Like, fine, India story is great. We all are firm believers in this, and we continue to believe in that. But what happens? Let's say if you want to take exposure to international, big tech companies, let's call it that way. Some of the tech companies in the US have done incredibly well. So what happens, if you want to go for those exposures, so is Nippon India planning some of those products as well, where, you will probably look to diversify more of, holdings and give that exposure to people about, exposure into those blue chip names, because clearly, purely from diversification perspective, it's a hedge against rupee deflation, as well as, good quality companies available all over the world as well.
Hmm. So obviously in the next possibly year and a half, we would also be looking at doing some international strategies. We already, as you are aware, that we were the pioneers in this kind of a product where we launched the first ETF linked to the Hang Seng Index. Way back in 2008. But surprisingly, that product has not gone too far. I find that especially at that point of time, we realized that there were very few takers for international products. Slowly, I think that population is increasing. You must be referring to, Motilal's Nasdaq. I think that's kind of gaining traction now over a period of time. So I think that's kind of good. We would also possibly look at some international products somewhere down the line, not immediately, because we think the market is still at this point of time developing. I still have a lot of doubts about how market making and how transactions happen over there. What happens is that the reason why we chose Hang Seng at that point of time was because that the Hang Seng markets were closer to the Indian markets. So typically what happens is that there's a 3.5 hour overlap between our market and their markets. And therefore, if there's any creation redemption, then it happens very easily. What happens when you come up with the US based product is that when markets are open here, markets are closed over there, right? And when markets are closed over there, they open over here, right? So when you get a subscription in India, getting a quote from a market maker in the US, your bid offer spreads turns out to be very wide, and that can kind of hurt investors over a long period of time. So I don't know if it's the best way to take in exposure. I mean, we're still not very sure about that, but if there is a demand which comes in, then we may look we may look at that. I mean, at that point of time. But again, I feel that a lot of these sometimes become flavors of the month. Last year, Nasdaq picked up a lot simply because of the fact that Nasdaq went up 30% and our markets went up 5%, right? Maybe next year our markets will go up 3%, 30%, and Nasdaq will go up 5%. Then the entire game changes. So obviously the reason why we're looking for a decent amount of AUM, because otherwise then it doesn't make sense launching a product. So if there's a good enough market, of people coming in and investing in it for the long term, then that's something that we would consider, and keeping that in mind, then launch a product.
Fair enough. So I think we'll, for the sake of our viewers, we'll keep the discussion slightly less technical, because my team is giving me a pushback as we speak that it's getting a little bit more technical. But tell me, Vishal, I mean, if I'm a very aggressive sort of an investor, and somebody's coming me and advising me, okay, invest in this ETF versus that ETF, how will I pick the ETF basically? What is the magic of picking ETFs, let's say Nifty 50 versus Nifty Next 50, or you might have gold ETF, or something around mid-cap 100 ETF. So how do you go about picking up ETFs within subsectors and so on?
See, I would say that the best thing is to follow an asset allocation strategy. Okay, in that asset allocation strategy, obviously you should decide on how much of equity, debt, and gold you should have. So let's take a simple example where I'm a conservative investor, right? And I want to maybe look at 100% of my portfolio in equity, right? Now, how do I make a conservative portfolio? One way to make a conservative portfolio is, look, I have 3 ETFs at this point of time. I have a Nifty ETF, which is the 50 best companies in India. Okay, I have a Nifty Next 50 ETF, which is 51 to 100, and I have a mid-cap, 150, which is 101 to 250. Right? If I combine these 3 ETFs, okay, I've got the 250 best companies in India. Okay. Now, if I'm a conservative investor, one way to build a portfolio could be, okay, that I put 50% of my portfolio in a Nifty ETF, 25% in a Nifty Next 50, and 25% in a mid-cap 150. Right? So basically what I've done is I've given only 25% weightage to the mid-cap sector. And whereas when you look at my portfolio, 75% is large cap. Right? So in a sense, I've kind of created a conservative portfolio where I said, look, I'm sitting on the best 100 companies which are large cap. So that is an India growth story. And I want to get that kicker in case the market turns up. Right? Now you can flip that allocation around. Okay, you can flip that allocation around. And if you're an aggressive investor, you can have 50% in mid cap, 25% in Nifty Next 50, and 20% and 25% in a Nifty 50. So that changes the entire risk return profile of your portfolio. and then you've kind of positioned your portfolio more towards growth and
Yeah.
hoping that you'll get that return whenever mid caps maybe 2 or 3 years down the line start booming. Your portfolio will kind of capture that. So it's
Yeah.
very easy to build, a portfolio keeping that in mind. Now, one more thing you can do: where does gold fit into the portfolio? Now,
Yeah.
gold, remember, is negatively correlated to equity,
Yeah.
right? Every time markets crash, gold goes up. Every time gold goes up, markets crash. So it's very negatively correlated. So one way to reduce risk would be to maybe add 15-20% of gold in your portfolio.
Yeah.
What you've done is you've just dropped the risk in your portfolio. So even in a time when a black swan event like this, like a COVID crisis comes or a financial crisis comes, you have a bit of buffer in your portfolio to, which will protect you in case this crack comes. So it's very easy to, kind of build your portfolio depending on what your needs are and what your risk return profile is.
Sure. So we have some very specific question here that how to do a dynamic asset allocation with a combination of index ETFs and liquid arbitrage funds.
So again, liquid arbitrage fund is debt. Okay, I would term it more as debt, though it's equity taxation, but you're getting debt returns. So again, depending on your risk return profile, depending on how much you want to keep in debt and how much you want to keep in equity, you can decide. Again, you can possibly follow the 75% and 25% rule, where 75% of your fund can be in a Nifty Next 50, a mid cap 150, and the rest 25% can be in an arbitrage fund, which kind of gives you kind of constant returns, though it is equity taxation. But the only thing is you'll have to hold it for a year. That's all.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, how to navigate in this volatile environment through ETFs? So that's another question.
See, volatility is part and parcel of investing in the market. So volatility is not going to go.
Yeah.
Now, if you go to see whatever had to happen has already happened.
Yeah.
So I would say that here at this point of time, it is important to position your portfolio for the future, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of times, and these are learnings that we have. A lot of times we keep buying stocks because broker ने phone कर दिया, बोल दिया कि ये stock ले ले. कोई दोस्त ने बोल दिया ये फंड मैनेजर है, ये फंड मैनेजर का एक ये म्यूचुअल फंड उठा लिया. फिर किसने बोल दिया बैंक ETF अच्छा है, बैंक ETF उठा दिया. But when you look at your portfolio, it's all a hodgepodge, right?
Yeah.
I think it's a very good time for people to look at their portfolio, look at how much they've put in equity, look at how much they've put in debt, how much they've put in gold, okay? And the best time for you to realign your portfolio and to clean it up. So I think, a lot of times what happens is we've seen our cupboards, we keep buying clothes, we keep buying junk. 3-4 साल ऐसे ही निकल जाते हैं. One day we need to open that cupboard, throw out all the junk and just keep what we need, right? So I think this is the time to do that and position yourself for the next 3 years on where you, on keeping in mind your risk return profile and where you believe the economy is going to go. Yeah.
Sure. And is ETF a good strategy for retirement portfolio?
See, ETF can be for anybody. Okay, it doesn't matter whether you're a short-term trader, whether you want to invest it for the long term, whether it depends on your age. Okay, now if you are 60-65 years, obviously you should not get into equity.
Yeah.
Right, it depends on your age. It's not a question of, it's definitely a fantastic product, if you want to keep it to your retirement, because it's cheap. Okay.
Yeah.
And cost is something that you have to focus all the time. We'll end up paying so much of cost to all the intermediaries in the system that finally we don't realize, look, it's eating out of my own returns.
Yeah.
The market is a zero-sum game. Today, if I have made return somewhere, somebody else has lost that return.
Yeah.
Right? And somebody else has removed that return due to the cost in the system, whether it's a broker, whether he's an advisor, whether it's a demat account, so all that cost is something that is the cost of doing transactions in the financial markets.
Yeah. So
right?
I found a BBC moment here, my 4-year-old is here. So I'll probably just ask her to go. Sorry, just bear with me. Yeah.
No worry.
Yeah. So I should have locked the door, but yeah. In terms of market makers, Vishal, what's been your learnings with the market makers, especially in this volatility? March was probably where we saw there were some issues around, efficiencies of pricing, some of these products in the market and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I think there was an issue. I would say all the way from middle of March to about, say, first week of April. So for about 3 weeks or so, we did face a challenge. Post that, things started kind of easing out, and now I think they're fine. At that point of time, what happened was that the lockdown from March 23rd obviously created a shake-up in the industry. So what happened was, because the markets were tanking, 8-10% every day, most of the market makers kind of pulled back from the market because they were getting mark-to-market positions in a lot of other positions that they had.
Yeah.
Stock exchanges were giving payouts late. Banks had stopped funding these guys.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys were asked to go home. They didn't have systems at home.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
nobody knew how to do an RTGS. Nobody knew how to do an application in a mutual fund. Nobody knew, everything was kind of broken down. So
Yeah.
it took a while for everybody to kind of get used to it and then come back, and then things got a little easier. So we did go through a challenge where we found that a lot of market makers had kind of moved out of the market simply because their offices were closed.
Yeah.
Right. So there's nothing we could have done about it. I guess, each crisis you learn a little bit more.
Yeah.
You move ahead a little bit more and hope that, it doesn't get repeated again. Yeah.
Absolutely. So what are we doing now, Vishal, to address those issues? Now that we know how bad things can get, so I mean, in terms of black swan, we know another black swan which has happened. So how do we prepare for some of these things again? That because we as a cheerleader of exchange traded funds or passives, we are trying to build up a market, and suddenly some of these events happen where there's a lot of sort of breakage, let's say, of pricing and everything takes place. Then how do we build up the system more efficiently with this crisis? So what are you as an industry leader sort of taking care of this, and how do you want to address those issues there?
See, let me tell you, Nitin, market making issues happened even internationally, even now. Right. So you had a lot of ETFs which were trading at a lot of even debt ETFs trading at 20% discount to their fair values.
Yeah.
Okay. This is despite the fact that, their markets are fairly evolved. I don't think anybody prepares for these events. Yeah. Right. And it's very difficult to prepare for these events. I think a lot of this is evolution. You have to just keep trying. When I look back in history, in 2008, there was not a single market maker.
Yeah.
Today, I have 7 of them. Believe me, in another 2 years, we'll have 15 of them. Right. So things will just keep getting better, in that sense, and the market will just keep evolving. So my belief is that, and we'll keep trying.
Yeah, sure. Fair enough. Vishal, thanks a lot for talking to us. So we have more questions lined up, but we are running out of time now. But really appreciate you taking some time out and talking to us. Thanks a lot, and you have a great.
Thanks a lot. Thanks being here. Hope it was of help, and happy investing, everyone.
Happy investing, Vishal. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.